Okay, so let's finish up our exploration of the contents of the two kits that we're going to use to put together your Raspberry Pi touchscreen monitor with a look at the Raspberry Pi kit. So this is the Cana Raspberry Pi 4 kit. This is the instruction manual that you get with the kit. This has some very good information in it, so you need to keep this handy during the construction. And of course, we have the Raspberry Pi 4 board. Okay. This is the latest version of the Raspberry Pi, and I just want to take a second to go through some of the different features and components on this so that you'll be a little bit more aware of what's going on with the Raspberry Pi. First of all, if we start over here on the left-hand side, we have a group of different ports. Okay. So on the bottom side here, as I'm holding it, on the bottom side here, these are two USB 2.0 ports. Okay. Then in the middle, we have a pair of USB 3.0 ports, which are a little bit faster than the 2.0, right? Later version. And then finally at the top here, we have a gigabit Ethernet connection, so that we can connect directly to the internet or a network with the Raspberry Pi. Okay. Now, continuing across the top here, we have 40 general purpose I/O pins, right? Header pins. These are for connecting to a breadboard or connecting to some other board, a hat, for example. A hat is the term used to apply to a special board designed for Raspberry Pis, which can be inserted on top of the Raspberry Pi. So it kind of sandwiches on here like a hat would on your head. Okay, so those are our 40 general purpose I/O pins. Right next to that, kind of behind the Ethernet port, is 4 pins used for power over Ethernet. So this is a way that we can bring power. We can power the board without connecting it directly to a power source by bringing power through the cables for the Ethernet, okay, or the internet. All right. Then continuing kind of in a clockwise manner, this is a wireless Bluetooth card right there, or chip, I should say. Over here we have our display port, so this is where we can connect to a external display. Now, very importantly, underneath the display port area on the board is the micro SD card slot. Okay, we'll be talking about this shortly when I show you the micro SD card, but that's the micro SD card slot right there. All right, continuing across the bottom of the Raspberry Pi, we have this is our power port, right? So this is a USB-C power connection, 5 volt, 3 amp right there. Next to that are 2 micro HDMI ports, right? These are used for connecting to video. Just to the right of the micro SD port is the camera port. All right, so this is for connecting to an external camera. And then just to the right of that is the stereo audio video port right there. You can see that. That looks like for a headphone jack or some kind of speaker connection. Finishing up with a look right in the middle here, this is our CPU. Okay, so that chip right there is our CPU. Just to the right of the CPU, the kind of big black rectangular chip is the RAM for the chip, RAM for the board. This is an 8 gigabyte board. You should receive an 8 gigabyte board. The way that you can tell whether it's an 8 gigabyte board is if you look very closely. I'm not sure that I can show you here. Let me try to zoom in on that. See if I can get that in there. Yeah, right there. So if you see the letters D9ZCL, that identifies this as an 8 gigabyte board. Okay. So just remember this is an 8 gigabyte board. And finally, the last chip that we're going to look at is the USB controller right there. That's the square chip right there. Okay? All right. So there's our Raspberry Pi 4 board. Let me just move that to the top. Now, some things that we have to assemble with our Raspberry Pi. These are 3 heat sinks. Okay, and we're going to use these to help the chips on the Raspberry Pi to kind of tolerate the heat that they're going to be generating. These are important because in our monitor construction, it's an enclosed space, and so heat can build up, and obviously that's a way that chips fail on computers is excessive heat buildup. So these heat sinks have a sticky back, right? This is the blue that gets peeled off. And these are attached, the large square one is attached to the CPU. The rectangular one is attached to the RAM chip. And then the small square one is attached to the USB controller, okay? We'll attach those in due time, but that's where they go, all right? Now, the micro SD card. There's our micro SD card, okay? Very small. This one is a 256 megabyte chip. On the back-hand side, we have our contacts, right? And this is important to recognize so that we know how to insert the chip, or the card, I should say, the micro SD card. So if I look back at this, right, the micro SD card slot, the contacts need to be turned this way so that they can interface or touch the contacts on the board. All right, so I can push that in all the way until it stops. All right, to remove it, you're just going to use your fingernail and just kind of grab it gently and move it like that. Okay. Now, most computers don't have a micro SD card reader. All right, and so to make it possible for you to put data and, in fact, an operating system on your micro SD card, you're going to need an adapter. Now, the one that comes with the card is this SD adapter. This is an SD card, all right? And you insert this like so, push till it stops, right? And then we have contacts on the back here. In fact, this is really for cameras and things like that. Again, most computers don't have a SD card reader or an SD card slot. So we have to have another way to get the data from our computer onto the chip. And what you'll have to use is one of these USB adapters. So this is a small USB-A, right? And then on the back, we have a slot for the SD card, micro SD card. So again, making sure to see where the contacts are. The contacts are going to be on this side. So we insert that in like so, push it until it stops, and then we're ready to go. Now this can be inserted in the computer, and we can download data and files and operating systems and whatever directly onto the micro SD card. So take that out. So you might, there's different configurations, different sizes of these. This is one that I just had laying around. So you might have to find one of these or talk to your instructor about getting one of these. All right. In addition to that, we have a power cable or power connection. Right, so here we have the wall outlet here, and then of course USB-C, because remember, this is a USB-C power connection. Last but not least, we have a neat little device that is going to be very useful, and this is called a Pi switch. All right, and the Pi switch is basically just a female USB and male USB that's used to connect between the power supply and the Raspberry Pi so that we can turn it on and off with this little button. There's an LED right there to tell you when it's on and off. And basically, the connection is going to go like this. And then you're going to plug this end into the power. Okay. And then this is a convenient way to turn the Raspberry Pi on and off without constantly having to connect and disconnect it. Okay, which can cause stress on the ports here on the board, and that's not going to work out really well. All right, so those are the components that come with the CANA kit and some additional components that you might need, namely the USB micro SD card adapter. Next, we'll look at starting our construction of the Raspberry Pi touchscreen monitor.